Okay, then. Well, where do we begin with this one? This is probably the most bizarre console generation I think I've ever seen.
Yep.
5 years on, pretty much 4.5 from the release of the Xbox Series X. We're suddenly we're suddenly finding that the consoles have actually gone up in price. This seems to be happening in the wake, but I don't think it's entirely related to Nintendo's pricing strategy for Switch 2. But even so, right, so let's talk about some of these price rises then. Let's stick with US pricing. Xbox Series X, this debuted, of course, in 2020 for 499 of your US bucks. Now it's 599, a whopping $100 price point increase 5 years after the product debut. Holy crap. The 512 gigabyte Xbox Series S debuted at 299, of course. It's now 379. The 2 terabyte Xbox Series X, $730, up $130, which basically makes it more expensive than a PlayStation 5 Professional, which is completely unsustainable, totally nuts. What is going on there? Also, confirmation that certain Xbox games will be rising to $80. And I suspect we're talking about the likes of Call of Duty there. That would be the obvious one, right? Well, I don't really know what to begin, where to begin about this. Bearing in mind, certainly on the hardware side, Xbox has not been doing particularly well. The concept of rising prices basically means that the machine is going to attract even fewer sales. Microsoft will surely be aware of this, so they must be fully aware of the implications. I'm curious what you think about this, John, because what can we say? That the price of gaming generally seems to be going up. We can talk about tariffs and whatnot, etc., which may well have had an impact on this. There is a more general discussion here that affordable gaming is basically being taken away from the user base, which is kind of very, very problematic.
Agreed. There seems to be many different factors at play here. But the key is that component prices are going up, right? And this is actually kind of interesting because it does harken back a little bit to that conversation we had back in Microsoft HQ in 2020, if you recall, when they were basically saying, like, we don't think we can reduce the cost on this machine, on this hardware over the course of the generation, right? And not only were they not able to cost reduce it, it seems like it's actually going in the opposite direction. And it's not just Microsoft. I mean, obviously, we've seen the PS5 Pro was a lot more expensive than people expected. Yep. The Switch 2, while I think is a reasonable price, it's more than I'd imagine Nintendo wanted, right? Mm-hmm. I'm sure they would have loved to hit that original Switch price point if possible. I don't think this is just like, oh, these greedy companies, whatnot. It really is, I think, just this overall cost of components and everything is going up. The manufacturing costs, everything seems to be in a strange place. And I'm not studied enough in this to actually say what specifically is happening here. But it does seem to be pretty much industry-wide. But as far as how this affects Xbox, it's a weird situation, right? Because obviously it does in many ways feel like Xbox has given up, so to speak. And I think it's pretty clear that they are finished with the subsidized console model and that whatever they do next is going to be kind of a different thing. So I think Xbox as a brand is still fine in terms of, like, they seem to be making money, Game Pass is doing well, but clearly what this is they're just changing the way that they're going to be approaching the console market, because frankly, how do you sell this at this point, right? Like, now $100 increase on a hardware that's 5 years old. Like, when you think back even to like the original Xbox, very different time, I know, but that was a 2001 launch, right? Mm-hmm. Xbox 360 comes out 4 years later in 2005. And like, here we are, it's like 5 years after launch of Xbox, and now it's going up, and I think it's already gone up before, just like PS5 went up at some point in certain markets as well, right?
Right.
So who's buying this at this point? I guess it's the question, because now, like, feels like there's even less of a reason for people to jump in, because the whole point of Game Pass, I guess, is to save money. And it seems like it would be hard to convince consumers that are out looking for bargains to then cough up $600 for Series X. And even the Series S now is closing in on the $400 mark. Like, just compared to every other generation, this is really, we're in unprecedented territory right now, it feels.
Absolutely, yeah. Alex?
Yeah, I don't see how this does anything other than shrink Microsoft's sales in the future for this, and their position in the console market getting smaller, especially if there is not some sort of similar response to Sony from world market conditions. Although I think the concept that it is world market conditions is a bit interesting, because as far as I know, like within the last couple months, there hasn't been massive component cost increases across the entire world. It is interesting, though, to see that at least here on the European and the UK side, there's also a respective increase of 50 euros and 50 pounds. We kind of saw it in the past before when Sony increased the price of the PlayStation 5. Yep. They only specifically targeted certain markets, basically not the US, and everywhere else got the shaft, so to speak. Yes. And seems like Microsoft, at least this time around, is doing that a little bit, but the US market price is the largest comparative increase here. And I find that curious. I wonder if they could ever explain it, but there's no context to this. It'd be interesting if they did say like, oh, this is because tariffs are coming in and we have to protect, we can't be selling these things at incredible loss. Otherwise we lose money. And I think that'd be just honest, and it'd be really good to hear those kind of phrases. But they're not a part of this. So it doesn't really help them out at all.
No.
From my PC player perspective, I do think it is makes me wonder, why would you buy a Series X in the first place now too? Because you're starting, when you get up there in price, with the idea of controller, Game Pass, Xbox Live, whatever, and the general higher cost of prices for games on console, I just really wonder at that point what you're getting on the Series X versus the competition and versus a PC at this point, that you would just say, yeah, I should get a Series X. I find it's totally not there at that price point anymore. You could get old used parts at this price point. That would be amazing, actually, on the PC side, and it'd be a lot more versatile and all these other things. So,
but you could apply that argument to consoles. You could get a used PlayStation 5 or a used Series X. Or, I remember I got the used Xbox Series S for £65, which is
that's a deal.
That was a crazy deal. But, in general, I think then, but you're not changing the cost of games at that point, especially on the Series X side, where you're not
you're still locked into that ecosystem. Right. And I think Microsoft don't care where you get your Xbox from, because once you're in that ecosystem, you're not going anywhere. We've got obviously every week we appeal to our supporters to ask, put forward their questions, and basically I'd say probably about 30% of them this week were all about the price increases. I think there's just a general worry about the fact that prices across the board are set to rise. At the moment, we've got this situation where, let's be fair, Sony did increase the cost of a digital console a while back, but it's been a while since they did price rises across all regions. What can we say? This question from Dort. Hello, DF crew. With Nintendo debuting the glorious $80 game and Xbox raising their prices across the board, do you think it's only a matter of time before Game Pass has to cost more as well? Seems like the big companies have realized gamers love to spend more, so they will likely provide us with more exciting price hikes. I think, Game Pass, they've done it before. And obviously they're talking a lot in their PR materials about the cost of development and whatnot. That surely must reflect on Game Pass at some point. In terms of those increases to prices, it's interesting that John talked about the conversation we had at Microsoft HQ way back in 2020 when they said they wouldn't be able to reduce the price point of Xbox Series consoles, and they were looking primarily, I think storage was the only component they thought would actually go down in cost over time. And that has proven to be the case, but it hasn't resulted in anything happening to the console prices, clearly. I think when you're thinking about how much it costs to make a console, I've heard some anecdotal stories that, especially during the COVID period, a part that maybe cost them 5 cents to buy could go up to like 50 cents. Apply that across millions of consoles, and suddenly your bill of materials is shooting up there. And that's just one component. But yes, the concept that they weren't able to cost reduce the Xbox and being upfront about it 5 years ago, I think it's pretty much the only example of a major semiconductor-based product where the company is actually saying, "Whoa, hold on a minute, hold your horses here. Everything you know about price reductions to date probably isn't going to be happening this time." And I would have loved to have seen, as you were saying, Alex, a bit more transparency from Microsoft as to why it's now going up.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe there's obviously this whole tariffs thing is politically charged, which has caused a lot of problems for those who have been upfront about why the costs are going up. But yeah, I think the other thing, of course, is if you own up to that, I think people in the UK, Europe, have every reason to say, well, why are our prices going up as well? It's nothing to do with us. Our prices are high enough already. Anyway, let's move on to this question. SJ33 in brackets, Jake. Just getting a bigotry. Hi, Jake.
Hi, Jake.
Hi, Jake. Hi, all. I'd recently been thinking that the Series S badly needs a price cut to £199 since it seemingly saturated the audience it could appeal to at that price point. Instead, we're looking at a hike to £299. At the other end, who exactly is buying a $729 2TB Series X instead of a cheaper PS5 Pro? Which would play those Microsoft titles much better. Obviously, the new market reality is making pricing challenging, but what case can Microsoft now make for these when they were struggling to sell consoles anyway? I can only assume that they're going to factor in that there's going to be a loss of revenue somewhere about this, but they think that it will be more than made up for with their multi-platform strategy. That's the only thing I can think of, and I think it's probably quite correct, bearing in mind they have got such a strong lineup of games.
Right.
Anxiously Chronoed Figures asks, hello DF crew, Microsoft raising prices of their consoles while at the same time releasing most of its games on other consoles makes me wonder who would now decide to buy Series X for $600 if for $100 more they can get PS5 Pro, which would also play more games from Phil & Co. Also, all of a sudden, the price for Switch 2 seems more okay. Well, it's not okay, is it? Microsoft's strategy is a total mystery to me, to be honest. Cheers.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much more we can say about that. I mean, the questions just keep going on. Let's see if there's anything sort of points-wise that we need to sort of cover here. I don't think so. Actually, this one from Jiminy the 26th. Hi, exclamation point. Is a significant price increase for next gen inevitable? I would imagine that Sony would have no problem pricing the PS6 at $650 American dollars, causing real strain on a lot of potential buyers. Even Xbox themselves are pricing games later at $80 and are not able to bring down costs. My other question would be, what do you guys think Sony and Xbox will price their consoles and games at moving next gen? I would personally love it if they waited until 2028 to try to bring the costs per console down instead of releasing the best possible machine and focus on games. GTA 6 $80 plus is probably reality. Thanks, exclamation point. Interesting point there, John. Obviously, when the PS5 Pro pricing came along, the obvious question to ask is, well, if this costs that much, how much is a PS6 going to cost a few years down the road? And I can't imagine it's going to be cheap, right?
No, I don't think so. I think it's starting to feel like these sort of like above $500 price points are just going to kind of be the norm going forward, at least for now. And also, it's pretty uncommon to see these types of prices go back down. So if things start to settle, I don't think companies are going to be rushing to drop them, right? Like once you go up, that's kind of where you stay. Mm-hmm. And I think with the Xbox in particular, though, they're at this point, I think, where selling that physical box is just not the key to their strategy anymore. Like, it's nice if they sell more units and get people playing on there, but I just don't think that's what they're after right now.
Right.
And as a result, it's like whatever they lose on that, it's like I don't think it really changes their strategy. They've gone all in on this multi-platform stuff, and I think whatever they have next on the hardware side is going to be quite different. And so they're just kind of biding their time, releasing lots of games, and basically working as a large publisher. So
I get what you're saying, but with Game Pass such a crucial part of the
I
business,
know.
Game Pass needs a piece of hardware to anchor it.
And I think you're right, but I think that it's their next piece of hardware that's going to be the focus there, right? Like I think this is like the beginning of sunsetting Series X.
Yeah.
Right.
Funny way to
it's a long
sunset
road.
them. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a 2-year at least sunset.
I know, man. I just don't. I don't know. It's such a wild situation. We've never really seen anything like this before, where the price goes up so late.
Yeah.
But I mean, I just don't see like our listeners have been saying here, like who's in the market for this?
Yeah.
Like, I just don't get it.
That's really difficult, isn't it? Interested to see how Sony responds to this.
Right.
But I think you're quite right, Alex, that all of this is going to suddenly, I mean, the whole concept of the console ecosystem is basically upfront, it's cheap, but across the generation, they more than make their money back via expensive game pricing, subscription costs. It's basically, plucking the golden goose.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very delicate equilibrium where I think it's at some point people are just going to say, well, hold on a minute, how much is this actually costing me? Typically when belts tighten, people look at their subscriptions first of all and cancel them if they're not needed. And but the console ecosystem is kind of so complicated that I think if you do the maths across the whole generation, you kind of realize, well, maybe I should be looking at PC. Maybe and again, I guess from Microsoft's perspective, they don't really mind that either because they run Windows.
Yeah,
and they've got Game Pass on PC. So wow, crazy stuff. Is there anything more to add to this? It's depressing, isn't it? Really.
You want to talk about the $80 price point for premium games a bit? I mean, from my perspective, I feel like. I think this is expected given the rising cost of game development for extremely large games, your Call of Duties. I don't know how well it applies to their other non-extremely large franchises like the new Doom or Indiana Jones level games. Those are obviously big developments, but they're not Call of Duty quadruple A size, so I don't know if that.
Well, I think they're looking to produce games across various price points, right. And it's basically discretionary pricing across each individual game. So the question is whether they, price them accordingly, really, appropriately.
And that's the thing, and I wonder how responsive those prices will be. For example, I think a lot of people will actually balk at an $80 price point for a game. To be honest with you, there are not many games out there that I would actually buy for $80.
Nope.
I have a lot of other expenses in my life, and you can't just be giving willy-nilly $80 out, for every game you like. And I wonder how responsive then the market from Microsoft's or Sony or from Nintendo side would be to people actually just not buying the game. If we would start seeing, as a result, day one buyers getting fleeced more than people who wait, kind of like the Ubisoft style, wait a few months and you get your next Star Wars game a lot cheaper. I wonder if there's going to be more responsive market pricing as a result, based upon the proximity to release, which I would kind of like to see, because the people who have the money and want to spend will spend it, and they're fine with that. They don't care. But for people who don't, they still have to have some market for them there. Otherwise, they're not reaching consumers at the point. They're not growing. Capitalism, blah, blah. So I'm curious to see if that is actually another thing that is a part of this. Not just them having tiers of prices, your Claire Obscure for $49.99, but also, I don't think they do it for Call of Duty, but there are other games reducing price over time much more rapidly. I'd like that.
Well, good news, Alex. Microsoft has a product for you. It's called Games Pass.
I'm not going to. I don't know about that.
Do you have any comments about $80 games, John? I mean, this concept, I think, Nintendo actually upfront about it. People didn't like the explanation, but it's like, hey, we actually think this game has X amount of value and we're going to price it accordingly.
I mean, I think it's more in the case of Microsoft, it's like this comes back to Game Pass, I think, where it's like, hey, you don't want to pay $80? Come to Game Pass, right? Otherwise, if you just want to play the game on a PlayStation 5, by all means play it, but it's going to cost you.
Right.
Is the feeling that's kind of how it comes off to me, right? It's like, we have another option for you, is what they're saying. But it's also, you know, with other games going up to $80 as well, it's a perfect time for them to strike on that as well, right? It's like, well, let's toss our hat in the ring too. The difference though, man, the whole Nintendo factor though is like, unlike everybody else, Nintendo games don't really go on sale.
Yeah.
Which makes the hit from them a lot harder, I think, versus everything else, where you can usually find other publishers' games, other first-party publishers' games even, on sale pretty quickly. Or even just like within the first year, and then they start to be on regular sale, and it's not hard to get them. But Nintendo stuff, man, it barely ever goes on sale. And if it does, it's like, hey, get $5 off. So I feel like Mario Kart's going to be $80 for a long time, and probably never not be $80 until, you know, it's discontinued. And then it probably won't go down that much either, because used Nintendo products usually retain their value. So it's interesting to see the difference in that approach for sure.
Yep. Okay, well, I don't think we've heard the end of this story, but I've kind of run out of the will to live in terms of talking about it.
Live.